Elendar 3 was never built to last. The colony had always been a stopgap, a temporary node on the interplanetary grid. But when the grid collapsed and the supply chains with it, the domes were left to rot in silence. Most left. The ones who remained either had nowhere to go or no one left to go with. Revan had both reasons and neither. So he stayed. He'd claimed a forgotten dome at the edge of Quarter 3 at once used for atmospheric testing, now patched together with tarps, salvage tubing, and willpower. Inside, the air was damp and clinging with the smell of nutrient gel and mint root. Solar veins above were cracked, covered in frost, but the inner warmth held, fed by an old filtration system that hummed like a half-remembered song. It wasn't elegant. It barely functioned. But it was his. Revan moved slowly through his morning routine. He calibrated the mist nozzles. He skimmed algae from the drip trays. He replaced a faulty pressure seal on the seedling rack. Every action was measured, deliberate, without wasted effort. At 47, he wasn't old, but grief had made him slower. Not in body, just in purpose. Then the monitor flickered. A weak buzz from the rear camera, a motion alert. He paused, wiping condensation from his gloves as he stepped to the screen. Static. Then a stuttering image. Something small, hunched near the back access door, half-shadowed in the snowlight. Not moving. Not scavenging. His chest tightened. He hesitated for only a breath. Then he grabbed his coat. Outside, the wind slammed into him like a fist. The air bit through the thermal seams of his hood. His boots crunched over frozen gravel as he rounded the greenhouse dome, visor half fogged. Then he saw her. She was kneeling beside the rear panel, head bowed, arms outstretched as if offering something to the cold itself. Her skin was silver blue, lips nearly violet, limbs too thin for a child her size. She turned at the sound of his steps, not fully, just enough to reveal eyes glowing faint lavender in the lamplight. In her hands, cradled like an offering, was a cracked ration chip. Then she collapsed. Revan was beside her in a heartbeat. Her body was light, weightless like brittle kindling. Her feet were bare. The oversized transit jumper she wore was soaked through and torn. She had no gloves. No thermal lining. Her skin felt like wintered metal. He didn't think. He just moved. Back inside the dome, the hatch hissed shut behind him. He laid her near the radiator on a heat mat, peeled the jumper away carefully. No major wounds, but bruising along her ribs, a faint burn scar on her left hip. Her breathing was shallow. Her fingers trembled with the memory of cold. He wrapped her in every thermal layer he had, placed one hand under her shoulder to raise her core temperature. With the other, he brushed a wet strand of white hair from her forehead. Her eyelids didn't move, but her chest rose barely. He sat by the wall, watching. He didn't speak. There was nothing to say. Minutes passed, then an hour. He dozed off once, startled awake by the hiss of steam from the hydro pipe. When he looked again, her eyes were open. She didn't panic. She didn't cry. She just stared at him. "You're safe," he said, voice even. "You're inside. You're warm now." She didn't reply. She didn't look away either. That was the moment it changed. He didn't report her. There was no one to call. The colony registries were offline. The oversight agencies hadn't pinged Elendar in years, and she wasn't a danger. Just a child. A silent, frozen question kneeling in the snow with a broken ration card in her hands. So he fed her broth. Let her sleep by the radiator. Built a cot in the grow room below the seed trays. He didn't ask where she came from. She didn't offer it, but slowly, quietly, something began to thaw between them. The days after her arrival passed in a strange, quiet rhythm, one that Revan did not create but simply accepted. The girl didn't speak. She didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't try to run. She simply existed, curled beneath the heat vent, or under the grow lamps like some small, injured animal trying to become invisible. Revan made no demands. He asked no questions. Instead, he let her presence settle into the dome like mist over root beds, unnoticed at first. Then, impossible to ignore, she moved lightly, almost soundless, her bare feet wrapped now in old thermal socks he'd stitched into booties with salvaged straps. He found her often near the hydro lines, watching the condensation trail down the tubes as if it were sacred. She studied everything, the nutrient tanks, the irrigation relays, the reactor coils, her lavender eyes tracking each movement like they were remembering something long forgotten. On the 5th day, he left a half-carved seedling gauge on the crate near her cot. When he returned, it had been disassembled and reassembled with perfect symmetry. He didn't comment. That evening, she sat near the root beds with her knees tucked to her chest. He worked nearby, scraping algae from a clogged mist head, when he heard it, a sound so soft it could have been the wind through a cracked seal. Leighton. He froze, not because of the word itself, he didn't know what it meant, but because it was a voice, hers. When he turned, she was still watching him. No expression, no follow-up. He didn't ask her to repeat it. Instead, he nodded once and returned to work. She watched his hands, his every movement, mimicking the gestures silently, with her own thin fingers. He adjusted the valve torque, so did she. He tapped the condensation tube, she tapped air in the same rhythm. She was learning him by the 3rd week. She began humming. It wasn't a tune, just fragments of vibration under her breath, like she was testing sound in her throat again. Sometimes it came in the mornings, sometimes in the middle of the night when the dome was asleep except for the machines. It wasn't pleasant, but it wasn't sad either. It simply was. He began calling her kid when speaking aloud to himself. It felt less strange than calling her nothing at all. One morning, she followed him into the central chamber and stood directly in his path, bare feet silent on the metal flooring. Her eyes locked on his face. My name, Eleni. She said it slowly, each syllable like it weighed something. A declaration. A request. He set the container he was holding on the bench and nodded. Mine's Revan, he said. Then, after a breath, you can call me Soul if it's easier. She blinked, then repeated it with the same care she gave her own name, Soul. That was the first real day. Seasons passed without ceremony. On Elendar 3, winter never left. It simply grew colder and less forgiving. Revan reinforced the outer dome with scavenged tarp and rust-proof sealant, while Eleni sketched diagrams in the dirt, sometimes helpful, sometimes abstract. When she smiled, it came in flashes, quiet and brief, like something unfamiliar she didn't know how to hold. But she never smiled when anyone else was around. Not that many came. The colony was fractured. The population reduced to small enclaves spread thin across dead infrastructure and snow-choked corridors. Trade was infrequent. Trust even rarer. One morning, Revan took her to Turner's Market, one of the last functioning outposts 5 kilometers south. He kept her hood up and her hand tucked into his sleeve like a folded note. She said nothing the entire trip. Didn't look at anyone. But he caught the way her eyes scanned everything. Faces, voices, hand signs, food, weapons. She was cataloging. On the way back, halfway along the broken tram line, she stopped suddenly and stared into the frost-bitten distance. He followed her. Gazed but saw nothing, just snowdrifts and jagged wreckage. Her breathing changed, shallow, uneven. Then she whispered a word he didn't recognize. Elru. It was the only time she showed fear. Back at the dome, she was quiet again for days. Wouldn't eat, wouldn't sit near him. Revan didn't push. But he watched at night. He found her drawing circles in the condensation film that gathered on the dome's inner wall. Each circle intersected the others. A pattern. A system. One evening, she stood beside him while he adjusted the valve regulator. She didn't ask, but her hands moved like his mirror motions. Perfect timing. He handed her the spanner. She took it without hesitation. Tightened the seal. Later that night, she fell asleep sitting upright with her back against the grow table. Arms crossed, breathing slow. Revan covered her with a wool sheet, watched her for a long time, then whispered to no one in particular, "You're not just surviving anymore." In the early morning light, she walked into the central chamber barefoot, hoodie sleeves dangling past her hands. She stared at him, then spoke softly. "Why did you let me stay?" He looked up from his coil adjustments. "You didn't ask for anything," he said. "Didn't cry. Didn't lie. You just held out something broken and then fell. That told me everything." She stared at him longer, then looked away. "I thought I was going to die," she whispered. Revan's voice was steady. "Then I'm glad you found me first." Outside, the wind howled across the frost-hardened land. Inside, a warmth bloomed slowly beneath old lights and root mist. She didn't say another word that day. She didn't have to. It had been almost 2 years since the girl in the snow collapsed at Revan's threshold, silent and blue-lipped, clutching a cracked ration chip like it was proof she deserved to live. Now, she moved through the dome like she had always been. They're adjusting nutrient valves, skimming algae trays, sketching calibration sequences in chalk on old vent panels. She still didn't speak often, but when she did, her words were careful and deliberate, like every syllable mattered. Revan never asked for more than she gave. But he noticed things. She'd stopped sleeping near the heating coil. She now preferred the upper stairwell, where she could hear the pump chamber and feel the low hum of power under the floor. Her blanket was patched with the sleeve of his old jacket, stitched by her own hand. The only word embroidered into the corner was soul. She'd put it there without asking. Revan hadn't worn that name in years, not since the collapse made titles meaningless. But it was what she called him, and somehow it fit. That morning, the frost came early, slamming into the dome like a warning. Wind howled through cracks Revan had already sealed twice. He layered the side walls with extra tarp. Eleni held the rivets in place without complaint, her hands bare and reddening. They worked in tandem now, unspoken rhythm. Then the alert light flickered. It wasn't loud. Just a dull orange pulse on the upper console, a proximity ping from the front hatch. Revan froze, one hand still on the patch line. They never got visitors. No one wandered this far unless they were desperate, insane, or dangerous. He moved quickly to the monitor, flicked through static. The exterior feed blurred, then sharpened. A woman. She stood facing the dome, just outside the main hatch, tall, slender, wrapped in a coat of stitched tarp and fraying market banners. Her hair whipped in the wind-white, long, unbound. Her posture didn't shift. She wasn't pacing. She wasn't panicking. Just waiting. Revan's stomach sank. Something about her didn't match the usual scabs or wayfarers. There was stillness. To her that didn't read as weakness. More like patience forged in fire. "Eleni," he called, voice low. She appeared on the upper landing. One glance at the monitor, and she froze. Her hands gripped the railing, her eyes locked on the woman's face. And yet nothing. No flicker of memory. No recognition. Revan's instincts kicked in. He moved toward the hatch, his coat still unzipped. When he reached the door, he waited just long enough to hear the lock hiss, then opened it. The cold surged. And like a living thing, the woman didn't flinch. Her face was raw from windburn, lips cracked. The coat hung half open, revealing bare skin beneath wrapped in cloth strips that offered modesty, not warmth. Her eyes, lavender and sharp, looked past him. Then she spoke. "I've come for my daughter." The words hit like blunt force. Revan didn't respond. Not immediately. Behind him, he heard the faint creak of a step of Lenny. Halfway down the stairs, frozen again, the woman didn't reach for her, didn't cry. Her voice had the weight of bone, but none of the fire. Her eyes moved back to Revan. I'm not here to take her, she added. I don't think I even can anymore. Then her voice cracked just slightly. I came to ask. She swallowed. Can I stay? The wind whistled behind her like an open wound. Revan didn't answer with words. He stepped aside. The woman entered. She didn't glance around with awe or interest. She didn't speak. Her breath clouded in the humid air. She followed Revan's gesture toward the lower cot and sat, not like a guest, but like someone who had finally stopped running. Later, Eleni sat on the floor near the radiator, silent. Her eyes never left the woman. Her voice, when it came, was barely above breath. Will I still be yours if she stays? Revan didn't answer. He handed her the thermal blanket and sat down beside her. He stayed close until her breathing evened and she fell asleep. The next morning was colder than usual. Revan stood near the upper railing, steam rising from his mug, watching the stranger Nali sleep on the lower cot. She hadn't moved all night. Knees tucked to her chest. Arms curled around her ribs like the blanket couldn't be trusted to protect her. Not fully. Eleni sat near the water recycler, carving scrap plastic into the shape of a stylized seed. Her face was unreadable. She hadn't looked at Nali once. Revan had 100 questions. Where had she come from? Why now? How had she survived this long? But none of them left his mouth. At mid-cycle, the woman stirred. She washed her hands and forearms in the small basin near the corner. Methodical, careful. Then she turned toward him. You haven't asked who I am. I figured you'd tell me when you're ready, Revan replied. She seemed surprised by that. She dried her hands with the edge of the blanket. My name is Na Velarun. I was part of a refugee caravan out of Theo's sector. Third wave. Transit. Collapse. Fires. My daughter went missing at a processing port. Revan didn't press. He just listened. I looked, she added. I never stopped. I found a half-rotted market receipt last week. A girl with lavender eyes, quiet, stayed near a man's food stall. I followed the rumor. Eleni didn't react. Just turned and walked upstairs. She doesn't remember me, Nali said quietly. She was half-frozen when I found her, Revan replied. No ID, no name. Nali sat down on the bottom step. I don't want to take her, she said. I don't have anything. Not even a ration to trade. But I saw her, and she didn't finish. Revan leaned against the console, watching. Her face. No lies, just fatigue. And something harder to name. She asked me last night, he said, if she'd still be mine if you stayed. That sentence hurt more than any accusation ever could. Nali's face cracked. Not with tears, but with something worse. Shame. She was only 6, Nali whispered. When we lost her, I thought maybe someone sold her. The silence between them lasted for what felt like an entire cycle. Then she stood and walked to the grow beds. Do you have any clean gloves? She asked. He hesitated, then handed her a pair from under the hydro table. She put them on, moved toward the mist trays. She didn't say thank you. She just started working. Her hands knew what they were doing. Not perfectly, but well enough. From the stairs, Eleni watched without speaking. Her fingers curled in the hem of her sleeve. She didn't say it aloud, but she was thinking the same question that now haunted the dome. Is a mother still a mother? If the child no longer remembers her? The dome didn't feel the same anymore. That it wasn't colder. The heat lines still pulsed under the flooring. The condensers still hissed in rhythm. The grow lamp still blinked awake on cue. But something had changed. It was in the way sound traveled, how silence lingered, how footsteps felt like intrusions instead of echoes. Nally had been in the dome for 5 days. She woke early, always before Revan, and took her place in the greenhouse without asking. She worked like someone used to being watched, careful, efficient, never wasting motion. She didn't touch anything unless she was sure how it worked. When she trimmed roots, she used his old shears with reverence, as if she could feel the weight of what they meant. When she ate, she sat away from the others, back to the far wall, knees drawn up, as if to take up less space. She never called Eleni by name, never tried to embrace her, never even reached out. Eleni, in return, gave her nothing. She didn't glare or run or ask her to leave, she simply avoided her. She ate in silence, did her chores with mechanical precision, and slept alone on the upper cot, blanket wrapped tight around her like armor. Revan watched them both, saying little. He noticed how Nally flinched when Eleni entered the room, how she stiffened at her daughter's silence more than she ever had at frostbite or hunger. Something in her had been left broken long ago. He didn't press. Not yet. But questions burned behind his ribs every time she moved, like she knew the layout of the dome too well. Every time she adjusted a valve a fraction of a degree before he could. Every time she reached for a tool he hadn't mentioned. But she still knew where it was. This wasn't the first greenhouse she'd worked in. On the 6th night, Revan found Nally awake at the water tanks. It was past sleep cycle. She stood with her arms crossed, watching the mist bubble up through the glass like it might answer a question. She couldn't say aloud that she didn't turn when he stepped closer. She used to say my name when she needed help tying her shoes, Nally whispered. That's the only memory that stayed sharp. Everything else is dust. I don't even remember her voice from before. She speaks more now, Revan said. Still quiet but deliberate, thoughtful. That's you, she said. She's learned from you. She had to. There was no one else. Nally's throat moved, a dry swallow. Her voice dropped. I thought I was going to find her with someone cruel, broken, starved. But I walked in here and saw her warm, standing, whole. She finally turned to him, her eyes rimmed red, not from tears but restraint. You did that. You made a home for her, one I didn't deserve to find. He didn't reply. Instead, he reached for a coil spanner on the shelf, but paused when he felt her hand brush his wrist. I'm not here to undo what she has. I couldn't even if I tried. But if you'll let me stay, I'll earn every hour of it. Revan looked at her closely. Her face was older than he'd imagined, weathered by more than time. She didn't carry pride. She carried debt. I'm not the one you need to convince, he said quietly. The next morning, the dome smelled faintly of garlic root and damp cloth. Eleni sat cross-legged by the pump lines, sketching lines into her slate tablet with slow, distracted movements. Nally worked in the nutrient tray behind her, soft footsteps silent against the floor. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Eleni spoke, without looking up. You could have come sooner. Nally didn't answer at first. I tried, she said eventually, but I didn't always know where to look. You didn't know how to try hard enough, Eleni replied flatly. I was afraid, Nally admitted. I thought maybe I'd be too late, that you'd already picked someone else to belong to. You kind of did, Eleni whispered. Her voice didn't shake. It didn't rise. But Revan, working by the side panel, felt his stomach twist. Nally stepped back. Not away but back, like the words had physically moved her. I won't call you daughter, she said. Not unless you ask me to. I just want to be near. Eleni's eyes flicked up. For a breath, she looked at her mother not with recognition, but with curiosity. Like trying to remember a dream, too. Distant to grasp. She didn't respond, but she didn't tell her to leave either. Later that night, Raven sat by the tool locker, sipping a weak root infusion, checking filtration diagnostics on a rusted monitor. Behind him, Nolly approached quietly. "She's afraid of being taken," Nolly said. Revan nodded. "Not by you, by the idea of you." "I know," she said, "and I don't blame her." They stood side by side in silence for a while. Then she asked the question she'd been holding for days. "Why did you keep her?" Revan set down the cup. He didn't look at her. "Because she needed someone. Because she gave me a reason to wake up when the rest of the world had stopped mattering." Nolly nodded slowly. "She gave you purpose." He turned to her. "What did you lose?" She didn't answer for a long time. "Everything," she said. "My husband died during a SEWRD med outage. Our power cell failed. I watched him fade by inches. After that, I just wandered, looking for trade, for rations, for anything. I thought if I kept moving, I'd outrun the guilt." Her voice cracked, but it followed me. She turned to him. "I'm not strong anymore. You're here," Revan said. "That counts." She shook her head. "I want to stay. Not because I think I can fix anything, but because I can help. I can lift trays, seal pipes, clean filters. I'll earn my place." "You already have," he said, then softer, "but it's not my place you're trying to earn." From the shadows above, Eleni watched them. Her hoodie sleeve bunched around her fingers. She didn't speak, but she heard every word. That night, as the heating coils dimmed, Eleni walked softly down the stairs, carrying her blanket. She didn't say anything. Just passed by Revan and stopped near the lower cot, where Nolly lay curled toward the wall. She gently draped the blanket over her mother's legs, turned, and walked back upstairs without a word. Nolly didn't move. But her shoulders shook once, a silent sob. A breath she had held for too long. In that tiny gesture. Something unspoken passed between them. Not forgiveness, not acceptance, but permission. And sometimes, in a world as broken as Elendar, that was the most powerful thing of all. Snow hadn't stopped falling in 3 days. It wasn't unusual for Elendar 3, but this storm felt different. The flakes came heavier, slower, like they weren't just falling, they were settling, claiming the colony inch by inch, hiding rusted corridors and buried solar veins like old bones. Inside the dome, the warmth held. But barely. Revan moved with methodical urgency, rotating sealant pads on the outer valves, checking backup relays. Twice, 3 times, as if he didn't trust the data they showed. Nolly worked beside him without being told. Her movements were precise, practiced. She wore a pair of ill-fitting thermal pants he'd scavenged from his old gear chest and stitched at the waist. She never complained, never asked to stop. Eleni hadn't spoken since the blanket, not in silence, not in anger, but in something quieter, processing, watching. The quiet wasn't peace. It was a holding pattern. Revan felt it first at the market. Turner's was a shanty town, now broken prefab walls, frost-streaked awnings, solar lamps hanging on patched cables that flickered in wind gusts. It took him 3 hours to reach it by foot, his pack strapped with dry roots and protein powder for trade. He wasn't worried about the cold. He knew how to move through it. What worried him was the way people looked at him now, not directly. Never that. But they looked. A merchant he'd traded with for a year offered him half value for dried bulbs. When Revan asked why, the woman only said, "People talk. Best to stay quiet." He said nothing, but he traded fast and left faster. At the edge of the trade line, he passed a man near the ration crate's rough beard, cracked goggles, too many layers for a single man. As Revan walked by, the man muttered under his breath, "Figures. He always likes strays." Revan didn't react. Not outwardly, but on the way back he walked faster. When he returned, snow clung thick to his shoulders. Nolly met him at the hatch. wordless, taking the supply bag from his arms and sorting it like it was her own. She moved with a familiarity that should have felt invasive, but it didn't. Not anymore. She knew where the root basin was, knew which sleeves went to which valve rack. Her presence no longer felt borrowed. Eleni came down 2 steps and stopped. She didn't say anything, but her arms hovered near his coat like she wanted to check. He was still whole. "I'm fine," he said, brushing frost from her cheek with a gloved hand. "Made good trades. Got extra coil." She nodded, just once. That night, they ate quietly root stew and heat-stabilized rice. The warmth filled the dome, but not the space between them, until Revan broke the silence. "Someone at the market." "Knew." Nolly looked up, tense. "Knew what?" "That you're here. That Eleni's here. That we're together." Eleni's hand paused over her spoon. "What did they say?" She asked quietly. "Nothing to worry about," Revan said. "Just whispers." But she kept staring. "Do I have to leave?" Her voice cracked around the question. "No," he said immediately. "You're not going anywhere." Then Nolly spoke soft but firm. "Neither am I." That night, Revan couldn't sleep. He lay on the floor mat near the upper vent relay, back aching from stress he couldn't relieve. Outside, snow blew against the dome like fingers scraping for purchase. Inside, it was too quiet. He got up, checked the perimeter, recalibrated the mist regulators again even though they didn't need it. When he passed the lower cot, he saw Nolly, curled under her blanket, not sleeping, just lying there, staring at the ceiling. "She's afraid of being taken," she said without looking at him. "Not by me, by the idea of me." Revan stood there for a long time before responding. "She doesn't hate you," he said. "She doesn't trust change." Nolly turned toward him. "I'm part of that change. So am I." She looked at him differently than not as the man who saved her daughter, but as the man choosing both of them. Then she asked, "Why do you do this? Why stay here with people who bring you trouble?" "Because you're not trouble," he said, voice steady. Nolly stepped closer. Her voice dropped. "I don't have a claim to her. I'm not asking for that. But I want a reason to be here. One that isn't just survival." He studied her face, the way her fingers curled slightly when she felt vulnerable. "Do you want to stay because of her?" he asked. "Or because of me?" She didn't answer, but she stepped forward and gently placed her hand on his chest. Just above the seam of his thermal layers. Her voice became a whisper. "I don't want to leave either of you." Revan's breath caught. Her hand lingered for a moment, then dropped. Neither of them moved to close the space further, not yet. But something had shifted again. By the 7th day, Eleni started speaking more. She no longer avoided Nolly completely, though she never came close. She ate her meals in the corner, drew patterns into her slate with half focus. But she watched. That meant something. Then, one afternoon, everything cracked. Eleni took her usual walk just past the old tram line, out to the busted water tanks and back. 15 minutes, always. No more. But this time, it took 40. When she came back, her hoodie was soaked. Her eyes were dry, but her face was tight. She walked past Revan without a word. Up the stairs. Into her cot. He waited 10 minutes. Then followed. She was sitting cross-legged on the cot, knees hugged to her chest. Her slate was untouched beside her. "What happened?" he asked gently. She didn't answer. Then slowly she looked at him. "Someone stopped me," she said. "A man from the market camp." Revan's body tensed. "What did he say?" Eleni's voice cracked as she answered. "He asked if I was still living with that man and the alien woman." Then he laughed and said, She stopped. Her lips tightened. Revan knelt beside her. She looked him in the eye. He said, "Does he make you share his bed too?" The words landed like a blow. Not because Revan believed any of it, but because he saw the poison in her eyes. Someone had put rot in her trust. And now it festered. He didn't speak immediately, didn't deny it with a wave or anger. Instead, he reached forward and placed a gloved hand gently on her shoulder. "You know that's not true." She nodded. "I know, but I didn't know what to say. I just ran." "You did the right thing," he said. "You came home." She stared at him. "Why did they think that, Soul? Why did they think you'd do that to me?" He exhaled slowly. "Because they don't understand what we are. Because people fear what they can't explain." Her next question came like a whisper. "Do you love her?" Revan didn't flinch. He sat beside her. "Yes," he said. "But not the way they mean, not the way they twisted it. I care about her. I want her here, just like I want you here." "That's not wrong." Eleni looked down, her hands shaking. "She doesn't know how to talk to me. She's trying. I want her to try harder." Revan nodded behind them. Nali stood at the stairs, still, silent, but listening. Her hand clutched the railing like it was the only thing anchoring her, and when she came up to them, she didn't cry. She knelt not too close and said, "You shouldn't have had to hear that. I should have been stronger. Should have found you sooner." Eleni looked at her. "I remember your hair," she said. "A song, a smell, but not your voice." Nali's throat worked. "I remember you asking for help tying your shoes," she whispered. "That's all I had left." Eleni sat upright. "You can stay near," she said softly, "but you have to stay." Nali swallowed. "I will." That night, the three of them sat in silence under the low hum of the dome's heartbeat. No one said what came next, but all of them, in their own way, had decided the same thing. If anyone came to tear this apart, they would not go quietly. The frost didn't stop. It curled up the dome's seams like veins of white glass, crackling under morning heat, hissing softly where it met the dome's exhausted solar skin. Outside, Elenda 3 stretched like a graveyard under a burial sheet of snow. Inside, the warmth held barely, but the quiet had begun to change. It was no longer cold silence. It was the silence of people listening, watching, waiting. Nali no longer walked on the edges of rooms. She no longer asked before picking up tools or joining greenhouse rotations. She woke before the heat cycle and tied her braid tightly down. Her back, the old refugee coat, had been folded and stored. She now wore a thermal jumpsuit that fit badly but moved better. Her hands were steady, her eyes focused. She was not a guest anymore. Revan didn't comment on the shift. He only handed her sharper shears, pointed to a pipe that needed patching, and said nothing when she used his favorite torque wrench without asking. Eleni noticed. She didn't say it aloud, but the way her gaze lingered on Nali's movement said enough. She didn't look away anymore. She didn't flinch when their hands brushed while passing tools. She didn't smile, but she watched. And that, in this home, meant everything. It was Nali who spotted the figures first. Midday. 2 men walking along the old tramway, shoulders hunched, faces covered against the wind. They carried satchels slung low. They moved with caution, not desperation. "Scouts," she said from the upper hatch. "Too clean to be starving. Not merchants either." Revan joined her, silent. He watched them as they paused on the ridge and looked directly down at the dome. They didn't wave, didn't move closer. Just watched. Then they turned, boots crunching in the snow, and vanished into the frost wind. Revan didn't breathe until they were out of sight. That night, Revan sat near the dome's filtration core. Legs crossed, mug of hot root tea balanced between his palms. Nali crouched by the spice vines, retying split stalks with strips of old linen. Eleni lay beneath the grow lamps with her arms folded under her cheek, eyes half closed but listening. "They know where we are now," Revan said. Nali didn't look up. "Will they come back?" "Maybe," he said. "Maybe not." But they're talking. That's worse. Nolly adjusted a twist in the stalk binding. We're not hiding. Not really. We're not advertising either, he replied. Eleni stirred. Do we have to leave? No, Revan said firmly. But we might have to be ready. The next morning, Revan reinforced the hatch locks. He rerouted the backup batteries so they didn't hum when engaged silent power. Stealth power. Nolly reinventoried every storage crate. She replaced the worn-out water wraps. She wired the vent seal tighter than regulation code. Her hands moved with a calm that came from not having to ask permission anymore. But something was still wrong. She moved well, but she slept badly. Her cot remained untouched some mornings. Once, Revan found her standing barefoot by the pump array at midnight, staring at the mist lines like they held an answer she didn't yet know how to ask. She didn't hear him approach. You're not. Sleeping, he said. I dream about her, Nolly replied. About losing her. Even now. In my sleep, she's 6 again, slipping from my hand in the dark. She's not 6 anymore, Nolly nodded slowly. That makes it worse. Eleni no longer asked questions about what had happened before, but she didn't need to. One night. She said nothing at all, just curled under the heating coils with her drawing slate untouched. Revan crouched beside her. She trusts you, he said. I don't trust me yet, she replied. He let that settle. Then added, she's not leaving. You know that, right? Eleni didn't answer. But she didn't disagree. It was 2 nights. Later, when everything cracked again, Revan was cleaning the condenser intakes when he heard the sound. Not footsteps. Not voices. Just breathing. Behind him. Close. He turned sharply. Nolly stood there, coat unzipped, braid loose, damp from washing. Her expression was unreadable, but different. Her defenses were down, but not collapsed. Her shoulders relaxed. Her eyes, exhausted but locked on his. I'm not trying to take her, she said. I know. I thought I could find her and leave. Thought that would be enough. But it isn't. I want to stay. But I don't want to ruin what you've built. You haven't, Revan said quietly. She asked if I loved you, Nolly whispered. Revan paused. And I didn't know how to answer. He stepped closer. Do you want to be here because of her? He asked again. Or because of me? Nolly looked down. Both, but that's not what matters. She looked back up. What matters is if you'd still want me here if she chose to leave. Revan didn't speak. He just looked at her, really. Looked. She was the opposite of what he used to love. Blunt where his past had been soft. Scarred where memory had been smooth. And yet, in her eyes was something he'd forgotten he needed. Someone choosing to stay not because they were bound but because they were free. He reached for her hand. She didn't flinch. I'm not letting either of you go, he said. Nolly's voice broke. Even if they come? Then we make them wish they hadn't. Later that night, Eleni sat at the top of the stairs, her feet swinging gently. She looked down at them, not with suspicion, but with a small, uncertain hope she didn't know how to name. Nolly turned to her and said, softly, I know you don't remember everything, but I remember enough for both of us. Eleni didn't move. Then she nodded. That was the night Revan moved his sleeping mat beside Nolly's. Nothing was said. No words. No declarations. Just the quiet pull of shared warmth between people who no longer feared the silence. And when the lights dimmed and the dome exhaled its nightly breath, Eleni finally closed her eyes. Without her boots by the cot, for the first time, she trusted morning would come without someone vanishing. But outside, the cold pressed harder. The scouts hadn't returned. But new tracks had been found near the old generator tunnels, too fresh to be from Windrift, too many to be from wildlife. Someone was asking questions, quiet ones, persistent ones, and Revan knew this was only the beginning. What they had was fragile, but it was theirs, and if anyone came to break it, they would not find a frightened girl, a broken woman, and a loner tending plants. They would find a family chosen unyielding ready. The humming returned first. It wasn't loud, just a soft, uneven melody drifting through the dome as steam hissed from the misting vents and light filtered down through old solar mesh. Eleni crouched by the root beds, half-focused, her hands buried in nutrient gel as she tended the morning sprout cycle. Her voice was quiet, almost unconscious. A broken tune with no words. Revan heard it from across the greenhouse. He didn't interrupt. Nolly stood near the valve trays, tightening a hose with one gloved hand and a strip of cloth clenched between her teeth. She paused as the sound reached her, stopped moving, listened. Her eyes flicked toward the girl but didn't speak. It was fragile, brittle, sacred. The humming meant Eleni felt safe. Safe enough to make noise again. By midday, the rhythm of the dome had resumed. Revan ran diagnostics on the power reserve. Nolly reinforced the mist relay in the upper corner. Eleni stitched new patchwork onto a salvaged scarf without asking who it was for. It almost felt normal. But by afternoon, something shifted. Eleni didn't return on time. It was only a short walk, a habit now, to the frost-cleared corridor past the broken shuttle husks and back. 15 minutes, no more. But this time, it stretched. 30, then 40. Revan felt it first in his chest. The pressure. He grabbed his coat, boots half-laced. But before he reached the hatch, the airlock hissed. She returned. But something in her eyes had gone quiet again. She passed them both, climbed the stairs, sat on her cot without a word. Revan followed. She was curled tight, eyes dry, but her hands trembled. He crouched. "Eleni!" "I didn't know him," she whispered. "But he knew me. He waited for me outside the tanks. He didn't touch me. Just talked." "What did he say?" She looked at him. He said, "You still live with the human and the alien whore? Heard he keeps you warm at night. Bet you're both grateful." The words burned. Not just in her, but in Revan, in his stomach, his throat. "I didn't run this time," she said. "What did you do?" "I told him to go rot. Then I walked away." Revan swallowed the pressure in his chest. "That was brave." "No," she said. "It was mine. That's our dome, my family. They don't get to name it anymore." That night, Revan reinforced the external hatch a second time. He buried the approach path with redirect snow, dug out an emergency vent line beneath the south slope, and rerouted the signal. Beacon. Not because he was afraid, because he knew they were. They feared what they didn't understand. A man, a girl, a woman, none of them blood, all of them bound. Nolly joined him near the coils later, arms dusted with condensation, braid loose and damp from the humidity. "She didn't break today," she said. "No," Revan replied. "She claimed something." Nolly looked at him. "Do you think they'll come back?" "Yes." "Do you think we'll survive it?" He looked at her hand, scarred, steady. "If we stay together." She nodded, then leaned forward, pressing her forehead to his. There was no tension left, no performance. Just breath, warmth, shared promise. "We were 3 broken pieces," she whispered. "But together, we fit," he finished. 3 weeks passed. The frost deepened. No. One returned, not visibly, but they knew eyes were out there. Still, the dome thrived. Revan built a second layer of thermal piping with Nolly's help. Eleni constructed a small wind sensor tower with repurposed scanner parts. She carved a nameplate for it, scrawled by hand in her uneven script. "Soul's Watch." They didn't talk about what it meant. They didn't need to. One morning, Eleni came to Revan with her drawing slate. "I think I want to build another dome," she said. He raised a brow. "Where?" past the tank yard. In the ridge shadow. I can route heat there from our waste. Coils. Make it a small one. Just mine. He didn't smile, but he nodded. You're ready? She paused. Not yet. But I'm thinking about it. He reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Her eyes were older now, clearer. You don't have to go, he said. I know, she replied. That's why I can. That night, Nally stitched a new pair of gloves out of scavenged fibers. She handed them to Alani without ceremony. Alani looked at them, then back at her. Are you staying because of me or because of him? She asked. Nal. I thought about it. Then answered, both, but mostly because of you. Alani blinked once, then pulled the gloves over her hands. They never called each other mother and daughter. Not officially. But in the coldest part of the year, Alani took to wrapping her blanket around them both when they slept near the heat coil. She'd fall asleep between them, arms folded behind her head, one leg draped over Nally's and her hand brushing Revan's coat. No one mentioned it. That was how they spoke now. A month later, a signal ping echoed across the ridge. Not a warning, just a presence. Someone scanning for movement. They didn't come close, didn't land, but they knew now. The dome was off limits. Not by law, but by reputation. Whispers turned to myths. The man who raised the alien girl. The alien woman who stitched heat into broken pipes. The girl with eyes like frostlight and a voice like a blade. None of them asked for that title, but none of them corrected it either. Revan stood one evening at the south hydrobed, arms crossed, watching Nally adjust a pressure seal while Alani tied a sensor loop near the mist tray. He said nothing, but for the first time in years, he thought the word future and didn't feel afraid. Outside, the wind still howled, but inside, the dome, the warmth held. Not from coils or pipes, but from the unspoken truth between them. They had been fractured. Now, they were chosen, and whatever came next, they would face it together.